Right, hello and welcome to Camel Finance. I'm your boy Camel, and today I am absolutely full to the brim with steroids. I managed to get some steroids for my chest last night, so happy days. It should start to feel pretty good pretty shortly. I wanted to talk about this thing that I often talk about, right? Every sort of weekly cycle and often at the daily cycles, I like to throw this out there and say every dip has its narrative. And ultimately, every dip always has a narrative. It will continue to always have a narrative appended to it. Because for some reason, retail and the market in general likes to have some explanation for the pullbacks into the daily and weekly cycle lows. So this time around is not really any different, okay? I see a lot of people talking about Nvidia earnings as if that means something and the entire market is buoyed on Nvidia. We're going to get to that in a minute. I see a lot of people talking about breadth being narrow. It is narrow, okay? But the reality is we are late in the cycles, and by that I mean daily and weekly cycles, and we need to find some cycle lows soon. That is all. So don't let any of these LARPs sell you fear, because this was painted on my charts months ago. And so I was seeing all of these kind of horrible memes saying the entire global economy is propped up on Nvidia and the global stock market, Nvidia, AI demand, whatever. The reality is, like I said, every dip has its narrative. Now, if you've been following my channel for any number of weeks or before, you will know we had these daily cycle lows and the weekly cycle low arrow, which is the blue one, the daily cycle low being the green. They've been here for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so all I'm seeing right now is this narrative show up to try to justify a pullback into a daily and weekly cycle low. In addition to that, people love to buy a bit of fear. You know, Amazon, totally normal behavior, nothing to see here, right? As Bezos is apparently emptying clips of $1 billion of shares at a time. But as Crypto El Prez points out right here, okay, if you compare it to historical data, we've seen this before and it did not necessarily mark the end of the world. So again, I say every dip has its narrative. Every cycle low, we get a pullback. And of course, the cycle lows serve to flush sentiment out of the market. So good. That's what we're seeing. People get sour. We do need the fear and greed indexes to come down a little bit. That's typical. We see that into these cycle lows. And then once we found them, we can look at going again. So as has been the theme this week, I've been starting to unwind my positions. I took the profit on my NASDAQ long right here. I also updated yesterday via Twitter and said I've taken both the SPX positions off now too because the cycle lows are coming. Now, I don't mind if Nvidia beats earnings, which I believe it did. I believe it's gapping up about 9%. I don't mind if what we see is some kind of reversal or push higher, then a cycle low, right? Or even and then a weekly cycle low show up, something like this. I don't really mind if it goes higher in the short term. Because ultimately, there's absolutely nothing to say that this isn't coming next and a much lower cycle low, or even perhaps another path I wouldn't be surprised at if we get this big pop, something like this, left translated daily cycle to form a weekly cycle low much further down. There's no way of knowing. All I know for sure is that 2 daily cycles are upcoming as always, and one of them is going to be marked as a weekly cycle low. So happy to book a profit on both those S&P positions, and I'm still pushing the Dow and I've moved the stop up to this red dash line as you can see here. So things to look out for in the short to medium term, right, is we do need to find a daily cycle low. Now, how low down is anyone's guess, but the thing I'm going to be looking for is if it is shallow, right, if we do something like this and roll over just a little swing, something like that, or maybe down to this all-time high level in green, that is the prior all-time high from back here. If we do something like that, then I think that opens us up to another rather net sideways, slightly lower cycle into that weekly cycle low denoted by the blue arrow. I also showed this the other day, didn't I, that we could probably see something in this neighborhood play out, something like that would not surprise me at all. But the market will be able to reveal a subtle tell if instead of get this kind of shallow pullback, if what we get is some kind of big plunge, something like this, and a V shape, then flicking onto the weekly time frame now, this will be clearly identifiable as a weekly cycle low, and thus we'll be able to mark this as the weekly cycle low slightly earlier than expected, but still within the specified timing window. So that is what I'm looking out for, right? Shallow pullback into a cycle low tells us we've probably got another 40-day consolidation or slightly downward cycle first. Even if we do make a slightly higher high, it tells me that we have another daily cycle before we can find that weekly cycle low, and that will be the ultra high probability setup. Or, as I said, conversely, if we get some big, sharp, V-shaped plunge here, then that will force the weekly cycle low, and I'll add all my positions back on this swing wherever it forms. So that is what I'm looking for now. As I said, we've closed both of these positions, we booked the profit. This was a very nice example of a trade because I doubled up my exposure without taking any additional risk. And as I said, even if we push higher, this is going to, in hindsight, show that I got out practically at the top. I never sell the exact top, of course, but this is good enough for me. And so we've still got the Dow Jones position as well. We'll push this until it becomes unreasonable to do so. Now, I wanted to address one more thing before I move over to Bitcoin. With Nvidia gapping up 9% and possibly going to have a big green day, of course the NASDAQ is going to move up. And I think if you check CNBC, you can see we got a 350 point green candle implied at open today for the NASDAQ. So does this mean I sold too early? Or is it much more likely that what we're going to do is come back in for a retest of this upward sloping support, right? Breakdown, retest, reject at this resistance as well, and then resumption into that daily and weekly cycle low. That to me makes the most amount of sense. So even if we go higher, right, even if we somehow poke up a higher high and then roll over, either way, I do think that daily cycle low is coming. And as I said, we'll be looking for hints, because if we get a sharp V, that will mark a weekly cycle. And if we get a shallow, something more like this, pull back and then bounce out of here, then we know the weekly cycle low is one daily cycle ahead of us. The reason I've spent so much time going over this today is because this is where the alpha lies. Not many people are aware of cycles. As I said right at the start, every dip has its narrative. There are going to be narratives. There are going to be people telling you that if we get that big sharp V that comes into forcing a weekly cycle early, if we get this, people are going to be calling for the end of the world, right? People are going to be saying that, yep, that's it. The top came in. It was just above this high, similar to what Bitcoin did back here in its 2021 top, right? We made a high and then crept up, just made a higher high, and then that was game over. People are going to be telling you that that's what's going on in the NASDAQ and the S&P. And if we don't get that V shape into an early weekly cycle, as I said, what we'll most probably get is more of an orderly walk down like this. And, you know, once we find a daily cycle, we bounce, perhaps form a lower high, or whether it's a higher high or a lower high, but particularly if it's a lower high, you know, again, every dip has its narrative. People will be saying, oh gosh, look, lower high, that was the top. You know, bad times ahead. Here's what comes next, right? 2008 style plunge. This is what happens every weekly cycle, okay? And just because we find a weekly cycle low in this neighborhood, as I expect us to, does not, of course, guarantee that we go straight up like this. We could always have some kind of daily cycle that right translates, followed by a left translated cycle and a rollover. Anything and everything is on the table. But my point is simply, this is where the alpha lies, okay? Because not many people know about cycles. Like I said, everyone's going to be trying to append a narrative to all of this. And really, all we'll be doing is a normal process, just like we did back here, just like we did back here. Okay, this is all we do. We find a daily and weekly cycle low and we go. We find a daily and weekly cycle low and we go. And now this time, we're just back in that timing window where we need to find a daily and weekly cycle low before we can go. So don't get suckered into narratives. Don't get chopped up. Like I said, even if we pop higher in the short term, it's most probable that we're just going to do something like this, which would ultimately confirm breakdown, retest, resumption lower. Even if I'm flat wrong about that and we come all the way up here, you know, most probably what comes after is a rollover into that daily and weekly cycle. So I continue to play patient. That's the alpha of the day. Don't get suckered into narratives. Understand where we are in the daily and weekly cycles. And once we found them, you know, that is where we get the highest probability setup walking forward. So that's traditional finance dealt with. Over in the world of Bitcoin, we have apparently wiped the longs down at 50K, and there's a whole stack around 54K of shorts that need to be liquidated next. So it tells me to keep an open mind about seeing that. We've also got Ferrari now accepting Bitcoin and crypto for payment in the US. So there's one possible exit strategy for you, okay? I occasionally see somebody very aggressively in the comments try to tell me that nothing is different this time, which of course is absolutely ludicrous because things are observably different this time around. If you notice the prior resistance break above the Ishimoku cloud, right? Down the bottom, we've got years 1, 2, 3, and 4. Years 1, 2, 3, and 4 repeats all the way across, right? You can see from this that usually we are early in year 3 when we break above this resistance in the Ishimoku cloud, and then we start a run to new all-time highs. Second cycle, we're early in year 3 when we break that same area on the chart and enter a parabola. In cycle 3, we did it ever so slightly earlier, right? We were very late in year 2 when we cleared that resistance level and moved higher. But this time around, we are a full year ahead of the average, right? We're a full year ahead of schedule at this current area on the chart. So if we get above 52.8, then it tells us to keep an open mind about seeing a parabola unfold immediately. Also of note, Bitcoin hasn't even begun its advance, right? Bottom area, lift off, parabola. Bottom area, lift off, parabola. Bottom area, we haven't even built the lift off phase yet, okay? Let alone entered it. Again, it tells us to keep an open mind if we can get slightly higher up on the chart about seeing price discovery and a parabolic advance. And sometimes the simplest approaches are the best, right? The 2-month Bitcoin chart shows that the 2-month MACD is just about to cross bullish, as you can see down here. Again, all prior times we did this, we saw very nice things happen to the price of Bitcoin walking forward. Will this time be different? I doubt it personally. Do my eyes deceive me when I look at the DXY? Because is that or is that not the deviation into CPI followed by now a breakdown retest and hopefully a resumption to the downside? Does that mean we have got a risk on moment? Does this mean the dollar has one final leg down into hopefully the mid-90s range where we can mark the 3-year cycle low? And during this time, can we expect to see incredibly bullish price action for Bitcoin and the stock market walking forward? If we can indeed get this yellow squiggle to play out or something approximately similar to that, I would expect to see Bitcoin do Bitcoin things, of course. Still playing patient with gold, but you know what comes next, right? We're probably getting into that neighborhood where we're going to see a rollover and me initiate a short. Oil, I wonder if we're going to get that rollover. Again, patience is the number one thing here. We've already kind of done the stock market, right? What else is there to say? I don't need to repeat myself. You know these cycle lows are likely coming. The path we take in the meantime is up for debate, and the path that we take into those cycle lows will confirm whether it's a daily cycle or a weekly cycle. So that's what we need to focus on. Small caps holding up relatively well, aren't they? Still in that range break area, still above support. So we'll keep pushing that as well. Did I forget to cover Bitcoin? I'm not sure. Still running a fever. You have to bear with me. We still have this kind of bull flag situation. Is some kind of pullback reasonable and to be expected? Yes. Do I think, though, we ultimately continue higher? Yes, I do. And there is plenty of space left in this cycle. So if I measure out to here, we're about a quarter of the way through this cycle, okay? Day 15. So we've got another 2 weeks before we can even entertain a half cycle low, and then another 4 weeks after that before we can find that day 60 cycle low, which should also be the weekly cycle low. Something like this. So definitely scope for a pullback in the short term, but I also think that ultimately we probably resolve much higher before we come down and find that weekly cycle. So that's that. Like I said, don't buy the narratives, and a bit of patience goes a long way in trading. Until next time, take care from me. All the best. Cheers. Bye.